Francis Ford Coppola could not have been any higher in the 1970s. His Godfather films had just done the unthinkable, winning back-to-back Best Picture awards in '72 and '74. Where do you go from there? Well, one way to down those sophomore blues is to get a right-wing gun-toting maniac to adapt the unadaptable. John Milius took up the gauntlet and brought Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness into the 20th century. The project percolated throughout the decade, but one cyclone, 2 dead water buffaloes, and 5 years after Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now hit theaters. What could have been a self-financed art house disaster turned into a bona fide box office hit in the first real Vietnam War movie. You smell that popcorn? It smells like victory for Coppola. Does the movie napalm still burn after half a century? We're going upriver to find out. Grab a 6-pack of PBR and head into the jungle with us for episode 110 of Toasting the Classics, Apocalypse Now. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it while we drink something inspired. We got the original lineup here today, Dave McArthur and
this is Dr. Professor Clint Lanier.
Pulling out the big guns this week. We are doing a war film that Clint chose, and what'd you go with?
I went with Apocalypse Now.
I thought that was an excellent choice. I hadn't seen it in I watched it when I was in high school. So I don't even know if that counts. I had technically seen it, but not in a long, long time. How about you?
That was a long time ago.
Well, my 30-year reunion's coming up in like 3 months.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I've seen this movie quite a few times. It's one of my favorite movies.
Okay.
It's one of my favorites because I happen to like early Coppola, whatever, however you pronounce his name. It's Coppola, I think, isn't it?
Francis Ford
I say Coppola, right, yeah. But I'm a big fan of his earlier work, with the exception of Dracula, which is probably one of his only later movies that I enjoyed.
So you're saying you did enjoy Dracula, even though
it's just one of my favorite movies. This is on AFI's top list. This is in Library of Congress as important cultural work.
You know who's getting to be my boy in cinema after doing this show and learning a little bit more about things is John Milius. He wrote. I think mostly he wrote this. I think there's other people with screenwriting credit, but I think this is mostly his work. And he's done a bunch of different movies that I really like over the years.
Yeah, Milius has been involved in a lot of different movies, a lot of writing.
I think he's supposed to be kind of a nut job as a human being, but I definitely have been into some of his work.
Maybe it's the genius syndrome. There's the genius gene that makes people cut off their ears and send them to girlfriends and.
Yeah, I kind of want to do some more reading about his work and see whether I like him as much as it seems. Like keep seeing his name come up with Red Dawn and Conan the Barbarian, Apocalypse Now. Is like a bunch of cool movies.
Yeah,
from about a 10-year span there that were his work.
Did we do Conan or Red Dawn? Did we do?
No, we did Red Dawn. We did Red Dawn. We didn't do Conan.
From Red Dawn, I think I got that he was a bit of a militant right-wing nut job, right?
Now, I'm not a person from Hollywood. I'm not saying he's crazy because he's a Republican. I mean, I think he's a crazy person.
No. When I say right-wing nut job, I mean a nut job. Being right-wing doesn't make you a nut job. Like, he was militant. If I remember correctly, Red Dawn was sort of his fever dream. It was something that he wanted to happen or imagined or something like that. But Coppola co-wrote it. I think they wrote it together, though. I don't think either one of them solely wrote it based on the theme of Heart of Darkness, Conrad's novella, and they wanted to do something.
So I saw a story that said that Milius was like in film school, or maybe it was even English, like studying English literature. And the professor was like, so many failed attempts to write Heart of Darkness. I challenge anyone in this class to try to make a film based on Heart of Darkness. And he was like,
it stayed with him. It stayed with him. I think it was in screenwriting, a screenwriting class or something like that. Yeah. I guess, for those that might not have seen it, do you want to go ahead and give a summary?
Yeah, sure. So this kind of paraphrases the story of Heart of Darkness, which I don't even know if that would be more familiar to the listeners than Apocalypse Now. But basically, it's the Vietnam War. It's set in 1969 because Charles Manson shows up. Basically the story is there's a commander of a unit of Montagnard, irregulars essentially in the hinterland of Vietnam, in central Vietnam during the war, and he kind of goes rogue to the point where the powers that be decide to send a special forces operative or a CIA operative. I guess he's worked independently for lots of different groups up the river to assassinate this guy. That's the plot of the story. That's the basics of what's going to happen in it. And the story is the tale of maybe 75% the trip up the river.
Yeah.
And then the last bit is all actually at the place in Cambodia over the river where Kurtz's little ragtag army has set up
Yeah.
a base. I don't know if you picked up on this. This is kind of early to talk about my overwrought theory of the week, but
Mhm.
I kept seeing references to Disney's Jungle Cruise in this film. And that may have something to do with the Jungle Cruise. I'm sorry, with Heart of Darkness influencing the African Queen, which influenced the Jungle Cruise.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a tiger that looks just like the one from the Jungle Cruise. You're going up this river. There's these little
Mhm.
vignettes of crazy war things going on that are just like the
Yeah.
rhino chasing the guys up the tree on the Jungle Cruise ride.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
at one point, the guy refers to it as Disneyland. He
Yeah.
actually says this is better than Disneyland. And then there's those stone faces from Angkor Wat that show up in part of the Jungle Cruise ride.
Jungle Cruise doesn't even happen anymore. They used to have the quote unquote natives, and the natives would,
Those might have been removed. Yeah. There's
yeah,
the guy with
they've
the
been,
heads, the guy with the
yeah,
shrunken heads and the
yeah, they've been removed since then. But there's the natives, and I think the natives like fired arrows at you or something, blow guns or something like that. Because I
there's
seem to
guys with
remember,
blowguns. Yeah, I
yeah,
remember that. Yeah.
and I mean,
But
there's even
like the
so
place
there's that part
the place where
as
they go
well.
past there's the helicopter that's burning in the tree and
Yeah,
there's the little kid with the helmet on and stuff. Didn't that look
yeah,
like something you'd pass on Pirates of the Caribbean or Jungle Cruise?
yeah, yeah,
Like a boat,
maybe, yeah,
like a really dark
yeah.
version of a Disney ride. Apparently, they actually tried to make a ride based on Apocalypse Now at I think it was Universal Studios.
Seriously,
Like
how
they actually
how
talked
how
about
how,
putting that in
how
there.
grim would that be? Can
I
you
don't know. I
imagine?
can't even imagine it. I can't even.
That'd be terrible.
It's in poor taste for anybody wanting to see anything from the Vietnam War like this, and it's in poor taste for the artistic merit of the film, I think, to have it turned into a ride. Like none of that is appropriate. That's just a bad choice all the way across.
You know, it's a really fascinating movie for a lot of reasons. You mentioned Colonel Kurtz, so you have Marlon Brando, the role of this Kurtz, Colonel Kurtz,
Hmm.
who's gone rogue. He's doing what he thinks needs to be done.
His methods have
To
become
hit
unsound.
his methods have become unsound. So he's like chopping limbs off. He's collecting ears as souvenirs. The Montyards refer to him as a deity, like they
He's
bow
collecting
down to him.
souvenirs.
Yeah, souvenir. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. So the natives, worship him basically, and he walks around as if he's a deity. So the other main character is Martin Sheen. I guess you'd say the main character is Martin Sheen. He's what plays Captain Willard.
Uh-huh.
He's this Special Forces Green Beret guy that goes to assassinate Colonel Kurtz. There's a lot of other kind of gratuitous appearances. You've got Harrison Ford in here. Harrison Ford is one of the, I don't know what you call him, one of the like
I don't know.
bureaucratic
He's
army
brass.
army
He's
managers.
army
Yeah,
brass. I don't know. I don't know
but
who he's
he's
supposed to be.
one of the guys that comes up with the mission, right?
Did
At
you
the
catch what his
Max.
name is?
No, what was his name?
His character's name is G. Lucas. It's actually a nod to George Lucas calling the character that. And it just
Right,
happened to be Harrison Ford playing him. It
right.
was originally James Caan, and James
Yes,
Caan wanted to be
yes.
paid too much.
And then you've got Robert Duvall, Colonel
Robert
Kilgore.
Duvall is Kilgore, which is a
Yeah,
good name when
Kilgore.
you think about it. It's either
Yeah,
a reference to Kurt Vonnegut or
mhm,
just Kilgore. And I looked
right.
it up, and apparently the character's original name was Carnage. They decided to tone it down a little bit and call
Yeah,
him
tone it down
Kilgore.
just a bit. Lawrence Fishburne is in here. I think Lawrence Fishburne is
Hmm.
17 years old when he made this movie.
No,
He
he was
was
14 years
Oh,
old when he
14. That's right. 14 years
his
old. He was
character is
seven.
17. He
He was
lied about
seven.
his age.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
17 when it came out.
I actually listened to an interview between him and Neil deGrasse Tyson right before you said we should listen to this, and he was talking about that, about how he lied about his age on there. So I got that. That's actually straight from the horse's mouth, that fact.
You also have Dennis Hopper
Oh yeah,
as
definitely.
the reporter that we meet at Kurtz's camp, and he's like he's a complete wackadoodle.
Dennis Hopper, I think, is the king of showing up in a movie like a
Yeah.
pinch hitter at the end of a ball game and hitting a home run. Just like showing up and being like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? And why am I paying all my attention to him? Because he's just really meteoric in a movie. He just shows up and you're like, oh my God, Dennis Hopper, he's great. And then he's not even really necessary to the story. I guess he gives some exposition about Kurtz.
Well, I think he helps fill in the role of like the whole thing's insane. When you finally get to the camp, it's like you're in a circus or something. The
Mhm.
lights are all weird. It's like you're on an acid trip, and he seems to forever be on an acid trip.
I think he actually was high on set and was motor
Mm.
mouthing so much,
Yes,
and
yeah,
that Coppola just put the cameras on him and had
just
him do. It
shot
was
him.
just like
Yeah,
do
yeah,
the introduction where you first
yeah.
meet him. Did you catch the
Apparently,
references he made?
not all of them. No.
So he talks about "If" by Rudyard Kipling. That's the one he actually
Oh yeah,
calls
yeah,
by
yeah.
name. But then he says the phrase, "I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas." That's from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. That's our boy T.S. Eliot.
Yeah, there is a lot of the wasteland in here, a lot of it.
Yeah, well, there's a
Um,
lot of wasteland. It's really weird because so he quotes the Hollow Men. So I read a thing because I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit about this. He quotes the other poem, The Hollow Men, and somebody talks about the Fisher King at one point, which is a big theme in the Wasteland. But the Wasteland original, the original epitaph of the Wasteland was a line from Heart of Darkness. I quoted a chunk of Heart of
so
Darkness.
it's like it's circular. Yeah, it's
It's
like
totally circular. It's in
very,
a
very
really
meta.
cool
Yeah,
way. Like I love that
yeah,
we're discovering these connections between these.
yeah.
That's like the whole reason for doing the show for me is to just go into that deep into this culture
Well,
and
go down the
yeah.
rabbit holes. Well, that's the cool thing about something like this. Obviously, I never knew any of that. I mean, it's you think that lines, that they're given or whatever they're reciting, just something that the author wrote, but they put a lot of thought into it. It was a
Mhm.
very thoughtfully planned out kind of movie, and it should have been. There's something that we should say is that it took a very, very long time to actually make this movie.
Yeah, like most of the 70s, I think they were
Yeah,
working on it early
yeah.
on. He said
Well, I mean,
he was doing some location scouting during the filming of Godfather and stuff like that, like
yes.
going way,
Yeah,
way back.
well, so yeah, well, the script was written, I think, in 69. It was written during the Vietnam War. Shooting didn't happen until 76. Then it didn't get released until 79 because there was a lot of delays. It was supposed to be, if I remember correctly, it was supposed to be 2 months, and it ended up taking a year to shoot this thing
Yeah.
because of delays. And there was apparently there was a typhoon that came in and destroyed
Mhm.
all the sets.
Yeah, do
Um,
not film in a place that gets
yeah,
typhoons or
yeah,
hurricanes. That
do
is a
not
life
film it.
lesson. Jurassic Park is the one project I think we talked about that got just completely derailed by a tropical storm or a hurricane. It happens all the time.
It
It's
does happen, yeah. So this is in the Philippines, and they decided to do that because they thought it'd be cheaper than Australia, like
right.
Northern Australia, Queensland, Australia. Turned out not so much because they had to rebuild the sets twice. If I remember correctly, Coppola took out a $10 million loan for the film, and then they had to up that to $15 million. Or this is
Mhm.
just for production. I can't, it was based on one of his other movies that was coming out, maybe The Godfather or something. No, no, it was based on box office receipts. He said if they didn't make at least 40 million, he would owe all that money back. He took the money from the studio, United Artists, and said if he didn't make 40 million, he would have to pay all that money back personally.
So speaking of rabbit holes, what are we taking with us down the rabbit hole today?
Hmm.
We got to bring a drink with
Well,
us.
you had a great idea. So because
I
they're on a
thought it was a
PB,
pretty good idea. The
yeah,
boat's call sign is PBR, which I'm guessing is patrol boat something.
whatever
But
river, yeah, patrol boat river. So that's the type
oh,
of boat
okay.
it is. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay.
it is a PBR. Let's do Pabst, PBR. I thought it was a
Yep.
great idea. I cannot find it for the life of me. I don't know if all
The hipsters drank it
the
up.
hipsters drank it all up or what. So what I got, because I like to think that at the very beginning of the movie, the very first scene of the movie is this really weird, I mentioned fever dream, almost like a fever dream. And it's
Hmm.
Martin Sheen having a psychopathic breakdown in a hotel room as he's drunk or high or something. And throughout the scene, he's turning up a bottle, and you can't really see what that bottle is. It's a bottle of whiskey, obviously. So I just got a bottle of Jack Daniels, drinking
Yeah.
that semi straight. Apparently, in that scene, he really was completely
Hmm.
bombed out of his mind. He really did punch the mirror, was bleeding all over the place, and Coppola just shot it. Coppola wanted to end the scene there, and Sheen, I guess, was going through some weird stuff and like begged him to keep the cameras
Hmm.
going so he could finish out the scene. So,
You know what that reminded me of was
what's
Taxi
that?
Driver. Like the guy
Hmm.
in the room all by himself doing like the practice karate and stuff. I think Taxi Drivers I was trying to remember when movies came out relative to this because I was thinking, is this
Good
the
point.
first big Vietnam movie? It's
Mhm.
not because The Deer Hunter's a year before.
Well,
I
okay, The Deer Hunter was released a year before in
okay.
78. I think they were making the first movie about Vietnam. Do you know what it was?
Well, the Green Berets or something like that during the
Green Berets
yeah,
by
yeah, yeah, yeah.
John Wayne.
I mean a
And
real
that
one, like a good movie. Like
well,
one that
that I'll say it's a real one, but that one had the characteristic John Wayne rah rah
right.
go red white and blue movie, right?
Mhm.
Whereas there has never been a positive movie about Vietnam after Vietnam. Like the only positive movie was the Green Beret, but then afterwards you've got the Deer Hunter, you've got Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Hamburger Hill, Full Metal Jacket.
So I was thinking about this because I was actually thinking, like, academically speaking, I think it'd be fascinating, and obviously it wouldn't be the first person to do it, but the historiography of the Vietnam War film
Uh-huh,
would be a
uh-huh.
really interesting subject to talk about because clearly, like, this one's only 4 years after our troops left Vietnam, right? And then you've
Yeah.
got Platoon and Full Metal Jacket. I don't even know if Full Metal Jacket is quite as anti-war as some of the other ones when you really take a look at it. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think there's a little bit of a softening in the 80s because you get like Good Morning Vietnam, which is anti-war but is the different tone. And then there's like what was it? We Were Soldiers Once and Young. I think that one's a little softer. So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to see if that kind of because I'm not sure. I was thinking about that with this film, right?
Mhm.
This is a movie created and it's a story told by dudes who didn't fight in the war. These are Hollywood guys. These are guys that were protesting and marching against the war. They weren't there. And I don't think it tells, maybe it gets it right. I don't know. I wasn't there either. But I think you have to be careful that maybe that's not the story that the guys who are actually in the war would want to tell about the war. And Oliver Stone, I think, is a little more legit, right? Wasn't he actually a soldier in Vietnam?
Platoon was his story.
This one is a little bit you're watching it and it's kind of how I think that the idea of the war got created by a lot of the art that was made about the war afterwards, and that art was made by people who were on one side of the political spectrum in how they viewed the war.
This is going to be a little bit political. I don't know if if you could have a good side about the Vietnam War. I don't know. It was a mistake.
Well,
Like,
I've
I
I've
don't,
said this a bunch of times. Somebody was interviewing president of Singapore at one point, and he said that the Vietnam War was an important thing to happen because it was like a rearguard action that America fought to protect the rest of the democracies in Asia to sort of develop throughout the Cold War. And if we hadn't put down the line, hadn't drawn a line and fought there, then all those places like Singapore and Thailand and South
Hmm.
Korea would have probably fallen to communism.
Well,
Maybe that was
that's
his theory anyway.
well,
He
that's the domino theory. That's the theory that they used to get us into
right, right,
Korea and then
right, right.
Vietnam. So
I don't think that was a ridiculous theory. I think there was
uh,
something to that theory. I
I
don't
don't
know if it was worth the investment
I
that we
don't
made
know.
in Vietnam, and I
Yeah.
think we killed a lot of people by fighting the war the
Yeah.
wrong way. But I'm not 100% sure that it wasn't a fight that we shouldn't have had a stake in at some level.
Right.
I don't think you can make a film that depicts any war and it's going to look good. War's not a good thing. It's a terrible thing.
I think there's agenda-driven movies. I mean, we did Sands of Iwo Jima, for example. That was a raw movies as
It
as an
was a little more
example.
nuanced than I expected, though. Like there's
Yeah.
some darkness to the
No,
characters and
there
stuff
is. There
that I thought
certainly
was
is. Yeah.
fairly
But
like this one. I think I'm not saying this one's not a nuanced and interesting depiction of the war. I think it is. I think it's a very smart movie. I saw some signs of people having an argument about whether this movie is pro or
yeah,
anti-war,
I saw that too.
and I'm like, are
Yeah.
you an idiot? Who would watch this movie and be like, this is a pro-war movie? That's ridiculous. What level are you watching it? Like the Ride of the Valkyrie scene being exciting does not
Yes.
mean the
Yeah.
movie is pro-war. That's ridiculous.
What's interesting just about the fact that there's a debate, because you don't have that debate of a platoon. The fact that there's a debate, somebody once said that the best lawsuit settlement, and you would know this as a lawyer, is the one
Hmm.
that is the one that nobody likes. Like
Oh
that's when
yeah.
you know that that's probably the best settlement when neither side is really completely happy, but they can live with it. And I was thinking about that when it came to this movie. If you are debating whether this is a pro-war or an anti-war movie, I think that's a pretty good movie at that point. You know what I mean? Because it has so much nuance that means it's almost like whoever's reading it or
This was a
opposed.
particularly dopey observation about the movie. The one person had a quote that said that the movie depicted American soldiers attacking a village in order to go
Yeah,
surfing. And I was
yeah,
like it was a good thing. You saw this movie, you thought the director thought that was a good thing?
right,
Like he
right,
was like, "Yeah, that's
yeah,
great. Well, we should do more
yeah,
of that." Like
right.
what are you, I don't know. Are you an adult person that just wrote that? Like sometimes people don't put the attention into things that it merits, I think. But
I think all around though, it's a fantastic movie. Ended up winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. I think nominated for about 9 Academy Awards. I think it won like two or three. It didn't win like any of the really big ones. It won like sound and stuff like that. I think as a movie, it's got some scenes that are just so memorable in it.
hmm
The Playboy Playmate scene, the surfing scene, as you mentioned, the opening scene with Martin Sheen. I mean, that's become sort of an iconic scene as well.
I think Duvall on the Beach is like the
Duvall on
number.
the beat. Well, the napalm line. I
Yeah.
mean, that's one of the most famous lines in all of moviedom. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. There's a scene where Sheen comes up out of the water, going to go
Yeah.
on his way to go kill Kurtz. There's a scene where they're killing the water buffalo, that's a nuts story. I mean, they
I
actually
was
did
watching that.
that.
I couldn't believe that was real.
Yeah, they
I was
actually
watching. I was
did
like,
that.
is that real? Is that what it
That
looks
was
like?
totally real. That
Ugh.
was totally real.
Yeah, that's
They
grisly.
got two water buffaloes when they made the deal with the Philippines, with the Marcos government, when they made
Just
the
had to
deal
offer
with
some shoes.
yeah, yeah, right. Part of the deal was that they had to give them two water buffalo and that they were allowed to use them for the scenes. Of course, PETA hated that. It got a bad rating from PETA. And apparently they based it on a ritual Coppola and his wife went to before they started filming. Like when they were scouting it, they
Uh-huh.
went to this kind of like native ritual and this is what happened. And they're like, oh, okay, we're going to use that in the movie. Yeah, so it's just filled with all these scenes, the Flight of the Valkyries, with the helicopters, with the speakers up on the skids of the
Would
helicopters,
that
just like
work?
blowing stuff up.
Could your speakers be loud enough to be heard over a chopper attack? I kind of don't.
Well, I have no idea, but similarity in the real story of Black Hawk Down.
Hmm.
Remember that movie? So one of the helicopter pilots was captured by the Somalis and was being held in a particular location, and they were going to like try to ransom him or kill him. And his buddies basically did just that. They hooked up speakers to the skids of their helicopters, and they were playing "Back in Black," which was his favorite song. They just kept
Hmm.
flying over the city playing "Back in Black" by AC/DC. And the guy like basically crawled out of the window, crawled to the top of the building when he heard that when he heard it, and was
Uh-huh.
waving his shirt so that they could find him. So
Oh, well, there you
apparently it
go.
does work.
There you go. That's a
Apparently it
good answer.
works.
Yeah,
Good.
that's a very good answer. I like that.
Smart, smart.
You said you saw this a bunch growing up. This
Oh
was like
yeah.
a movie that you like a lot.
Not necessarily growing up, but like that sounds weird. But like I think I first time I saw it was probably in college,
Hmm.
and
Well,
I've
I
seen it.
had some war movies. Yeah, yeah. There's some war movies in my life that I did. I watched over and over again growing up. I must have seen Glory 100 times. I've probably seen, what was it? Oh, Red Dawn. How creepy is that? I watched that over and over again when I was a kid. Like, I love that movie.
So my dad was a Vietnam vet, and it was a big part of he split when I was young, but still,
Right.
it was a big part of my mom's life too because like that was their kind of defining moment, like in
Yeah,
their
sure.
generation, right?
Yeah.
And when
Especially if you were
Platoon,
over there. My dad
yeah,
was a vet, but he served stateside, so he didn't go. But
when Platoon came out, I think I was 10 years old. My mom took us to go see Platoon. I was 10, and
wow.
she took me to go see that. And the reason she took me to go see that was because she wanted me to understand like what her generation went through. Like what she was like, we saw this on the news every night
Yeah.
for like 5 straight years,
Yep.
from 60 or 67, I guess, to like 73. Every night they show actual war footage on the news, and like you'd sit around the TV and see what names were called
Yeah,
to see
my
if
mom used to.
so she wanted us to see it. So yeah, I would never have seen this movie like in my house
Oh, yeah.
because it was such a serious kind of subject versus like Red Dawn, which is sort of, fun. Rambo 2 was considered such a whichever one he fights against the Ruskies. I think it was
That's true.
three. That
Yeah.
yeah, that was considered such a patriotic movie. It's so stupid, you know? But I mean that's how dumb we were back then.
I never saw
Anyway,
that one. But
you
anyway.
never saw that one? I think he was in Afghanistan, I want to say, something like
Yeah,
that.
it's Afghan. I remember it. I
Yeah.
remember the helicopters in the commercials, those cool looking helicopters the
Yeah.
Russians had. But you
Oh
were
well.
talking about some scenes that were really great in this, and that's 100% true. But there's like some shots that I loved. Like I really like the one where the boat goes under the big MiG, the crashed MiG that's like right above them. At least there's a bit where the Playboy bunnies come to do the USO performance, and at the end the guys are hanging on the chopper as it leaves, which is like a callback to the fall of Saigon in 75. Thought that was pretty clever. One I thought was really interesting is when their Duval's troops are taking the town, and he wants to have steak. So the chopper is carrying away that cow. It's in like the netting under it. And I realized Steven Spielberg is doing a nod to that in Jurassic Park when they have the big cow that gets lowered down to the dinosaurs.
So this was directed by Coppola and it was produced by United Artists. So United Artists was a studio that was formed by Coppola, Lucas, and Spielberg. And there might have been a couple more, but those are the three main guys. And the way UA worked was they all shared the profits of whatever everybody else did. And so UA produced Star Wars, Godfather, Jaws,
UA, no,
and
UA didn't produce Star Wars. That's Fox, 20th Century Fox. Unless
from the
I'm,
beginning. from the beginning.
With the big drum roll at the beginning, everything. Yeah,
United
unless I'm losing my mind.
Artists
United is all the Spielberg stuff. E.T., Jaws.
did Rocky. I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay, Rocky.
But it was actually founded by. Do you know who it was founded by?
United Artists? Some Jewish guy in the 20s?
Charlie Chaplin. So you're right.
Oh, was Charlie Chaplin Jewish? I didn't know that.
Was he? I don't know. It was in the 20s. It was certainly
Okay,
in the
well,
20s.
I got the 20s part right.
Yeah, you got that part. That was a good one.
Century
I know
Fox.
that the three of those guys were tight as can be. I think all of them went to USC.
You talking about Coppola, Lucas, and Spielberg?
Yeah,
Yeah, they were all boys when they were growing up.
yeah.
They went was it
Um,
USC? Maybe it was USC, but they all went to school together.
and what's funny is you see the cast members in each other's movies. So
Hmm.
like Harrison Ford, Robert Duvall. So Robert Duvall was in THX,
Oh, was he?
which
I've
was
never seen
yeah,
that.
he was Lucas's movie.
Well,
Then you've
Lucas was
got
supposed to be involved in this one apparently at some point. He
that's my biggest surprise.
Oh, okay.
Was George
Well, go
Lucas
ahead.
was originally supposed to direct this, and it was supposed to be a dark comedy.
Yeah.
And all I could think of was how he tried so hard to ruin Indiana Jones, and I was like, thank God Lucas didn't do this movie
Yeah,
because
that's a guy that
it would have been terrible.
he needs people to tell him no. He's capable of making some of my favorite movies of all time. He really is, but he really, really needs people to tell him
I
no
mean,
because he has some
if you
terrible
remember
ideas.
Indiana Jones, Miriam was
Oh
12,
yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah,
Indiana
yeah, yeah.
Jones was like in his 20s working on his PhD or something under Ravenswood. But
Let me ask you something about this. So I'm trying to remember what the word for it is. I think it's bathos is when you like kind of screw up trying to have an emotional moment. So let me
hmm,
ask you if this one works for you. When Lawrence Fishburne's character gets killed, they get in that
hmm,
gunfight and he gets hit
hmm,
by a bullet and dies, and
hmm.
he's like dead on the deck of the ship and his mother's voice is playing on the tape recorder. Does that work or is that too much? Does that cross over the border of being corny? Because for a minute I was like, oh man, that's dark. And then I was like, wait, am I being a dork by being affected by that? Is that heavy-handed?
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
now,
that's the point. That's the point of it. Is he's trying as hard as he can to make you emotional about it, right? To make you feel that way.
but did that work
Um,
for you?
I don't know. It's hard to say because I've seen it so many times. I knew it was
Okay.
coming. It almost like for you, this is. I'm glad that you hadn't seen it in such a long time because
Yeah.
something like that works, right? I don't remember the first time I saw it if what my reaction was, but I mean that's clearly what it's designed for. There's a lot of the kind of tearjerker moments that don't really happen for
Well,
me.
the bit on the boat where they sort of randomly shoot the poor Vietnamese people in the sampan and because
Yeah,
the girl's going for the dog. That was the same reaction. Like my first reaction was like, "Oh my God, it's so horrible." Like I was actually affected by it. But then I was like, "Wait, am I being a dork by letting that affect me, or is that an effective scene?" I can't decide. I can't decide if I'm being corny or not. I don't know.
yeah, that's I don't know. Like I said, it's I mean it's part of the movie magic.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I want to talk about its influence a
Okay.
little bit. Can you think of any movies that have been influenced by this movie?
Oh God, I mean tons, right? I mean, like I said, so this is the first big Vietnam movie. Deer Hunter's got some scenes in Vietnam, but this
Mhm.
one's really like I think everything that does Vietnam after this is responding to it in some way, if you know what I mean. In terms of films that were directly affected by it, that is a really good question. I think anything where somebody comes up out of the water, which has been done over and over and over again, I think that shot, just specifically that shot, I don't know. I feel like you've got something locked and loaded as a theory, but
The Flight of the Valkyries, representations of that scene.
wasn't
I
that in
love
Bugs
this.
Bunny first?
I don't know, but no, representations of where they're flying the helicopters in line, and you hear the flight of the Valkyries, and all of a sudden the missiles shoot. There's been representations all over the place of that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Again, has been copied and chewed up. And one of my favorite legacy moments was in Hot Shots Part Two
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
with
I read
Charlie
about
Sheen
that.
and
I've
Martin
never seen
Sheen.
that, but I read that. I
It
love
was
that.
really funny because it's a stupid movie, right? And it's supposed to be a
Yep.
satire of like Top
War
Gun,
movies.
yeah, war movies. Charlie Sheen is on this boat in the river and he's writing a letter and he's narrating it like in his mind. You can hear him narrating it. And at the same, and then all of a sudden it kind of crosses with the narration of Martin Sheen as he's reading,
Oh, that's even
as
better than I thought. Yeah.
he's reading the dossier. And
Hmm.
he's like, I couldn't understand why they wanted this man killed. He had so many decorations, that part. So it's both of their narrations happening at one time. And then they look up and see each other as they're passing
Yeah.
as the boats are passing, and they stand up and loved you in Wall Street.
Yeah,
And they
that's
sit
great.
back down. And that was a great scene.
That's
But
that's the kind of moment that that today that'd be like a YouTube short and you'd be like, haha,
yes,
that's funny.
yeah,
But back in those days, you'd go sit through a whole movie because it had a
just for that.
1 minute sequence that was for
But
that funny. Like,
it's nowhere in here, which is really surprising. It's nowhere like in Wikipedia or anything else. But have you ever seen Tropic Thunder?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That was good.
One of my one
That
of
was
my
great.
favorite movies. It is it not based on this because you've got a
Yeah,
movie about
yeah, yeah,
Vietnam
yeah, yeah.
that
Very similar.
like everything's going wrong. It's a movie about making a movie about Vietnam. Everything's going wrong. They can't make the movie. All this other stuff is happening.
They have to go way off on a mission. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah.
it's there's so many parts of that, and I was like, everything was ripped. It was basically a parody of Apocalypse Now. Now,
Mhm.
in retrospect, I had never really thought of that. In fact, who's the guy that plays Four Leaf Tayback or whatever his name is? Like supposedly the guy that wrote the book that lost his arms that Ben Stiller is playing, Nick Nolte.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
Nick Nolte is in Tropic Thunder, and he plays the guy that it's supposed to be based on. Nick
Hmm.
Nolte was one of the actors who was considered for Martin Sheen's character
Oh,
Willard
that would have worked.
in
That would have
in
worked.
uh,
That's better
in.
than some of the. They actually started filming with Harvey Keitel apparently.
Oh, that's terrible.
Which
That's
is
a
not
terrible idea.
well, apparently the problem really was that it's an observer character. He's sort of the straight man. He sort of like sits there and observes things going
Yeah,
on. And Harvey
yeah,
Keitel just chews the scenery too much and just can't
yeah.
do that. And
So
it was primarily supposed to be Steve McQueen. That was the original person. And I mean, Steve McQueen is awesome. I think he's too much for this part. First of all, he's
yeah,
too old. He would have looked
yeah,
like somebody from a movie from 15 years before.
true.
I think Martin Sheen is much more contemporary and the right. Even Martin Sheen is actually a little old for the
Yeah,
character.
he's like 36, but
Yeah, he's a little closer to 40.
so so Martin Sheen tested for the part of Michael Corleone in The
Oh,
Godfather. You can YouTube it. It's funny because he has a long hair. He's got it pulled back in a ponytail, which is really weird for Martin Sheen. But he tested for it, and Coppola remembered him from that test and was like, "Oh, I like that guy. Maybe we can get him."
okay.
Anyway, the whole Tropic Thunder Apocalypse Now connection. If you're listening to this, go watch them both back to back. I have them both memorized. So
I know why I was thinking about how we watched it in high schools because there's the one guy the guy that plays the chef who plays the New
yes,
Orleans guy.
yeah,
There's the bit where they go off into the jungle and the tiger comes out after them and he
yeah.
it was a tiger,
It
man.
is a
We
tiger.
used to say that all the time in high school.
Yeah,
Like my friends would.
that's awesome.
Because that guy was also in the movie Falling Down. Did you see that with Michael
Yes,
Douglas?
yeah,
And
yeah,
for some, I haven't seen it since. I have no idea if that's a good movie at all,
yeah,
but we loved it at the time. And
yeah.
there's that same actor shows up and he's like he runs into him and he's in this weird like army surplus store. So he's
Uh-huh.
this crazy old like, kind of John Milius, I guess, as a
Yeah,
character
yeah,
the
maybe.
film. He's got this he's like giving him he's like, here you go, grenade launcher, man. You can use this, man.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he has like a snow globe he's gonna give to his little girl, and he's like, what's this?
Right.
That's
That's
another one.
awesome.
We used to say that all the time. My friends would be, what's this?
Well, can we at least say gay? Hey, that's gay.
My roommate after Hurricane Katrina, when I went to Boulder, there was a guy there who like offered me a room to stay at his house, really nice guy at the law school. And so I'm rooming with him. Turns out he's gay, but we're like hanging out, and it was the funniest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Whenever he was playing video games and he would die, he'd go, gay, like really loud. And I had actually learned to stop saying that as like a word
Uh-huh.
for things that are bad. And I
Yeah.
picked it back up again from my gay roommate. And so I'm walking around saying, gay. And people are like, that's not okay to say that. And I'm like, no, I have gay friends. Like,
I say things now because people tell me they're not okay to say.
well, there's
When
also
somebody,
that. One of my favorite moments was I was at we went to a Braves game last summer. Alex and I,
uh,
actually, the Braves are like got a couple of guys on and they turned down the lights and everybody's doing the tomahawk chop. And I was
yeah,
like, this is awesome. Like,
yeah,
first of all, it's nice to have a collective experience of any kind
but that they're still
after
doing.
coming out of COVID, but
Oh,
also the
yeah,
few factor on still
yeah.
doing the tomahawk
Yes,
chop.
yes. That's why the Redskins need to change their name back from the stupid Commanders.
Redskins, I
Anyway,
think was
no, come
I think
on.
wokeness notwithstanding, I think Redskins is a bridge too far. Just that name.
Native Americans,
I don't think Braves is I don't even think Indians.
Native Americans didn't give pulled them. They surveyed them. They didn't care. They're
Well,
like,
that
who
might be
cares?
true, but
You know,
that was bad enough when I was a
it
little
was.
kid.
I guarantee you, it was a blonde, a bottle
Mhm.
blonde,
Agreed.
40-year-old
Agreed.
Karen
Agreed.
who said
Agreed.
that we need to change the name, and that's how it
Although
started. So
Although I do have a very distinctive memory of sitting at the ball field one time, and I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and I was about 11. I remember I said to
mhm.
my dad, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that name ain't right, is it?" And he was like, "No, not really." I wasn't gonna like, protest and make something change, but I've definitely, even on my own, without anybody telling me, I was like, "Ooh, Redskins? Like that's too much, man." But then whenever anybody would complain about it, I would always say, "You know what? We had a badass basketball team named the Bullets." And some PC warrior dad made us change it to the freaking Wizards. And I was like, if we ever change the Redskins, I'm not agreeing to it until I see it in writing what the new team is going to be named. Because if it's something like Wizards, we're not doing it.
Oh, so I was gonna say, so there right there, okay, you talked about the chef. Right
Chef,
there's
yeah.
a connection there's a scene in Tropic Thunder when Robert Downey Jr.'s character calls for them to take a break, and he's like, I used to be a saucier in New Orleans, yo. And
Yeah.
he's like, I bet I can make it, and it's a direct nod to that character, to Chef.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's
I
I
didn't
used to
pick
be a
up on it.
saucier in New Orleans.
Nice.
Yeah, I bet I could make some crawdaddies out of that patty. Go
There's a
on
lot of other
here.
little things. The Playboy bunnies is like they had three ladies, two of which were actual Playboy bunnies, so they put their centerfolds up. But the third is the first film appearance of the woman who plays Yvette in Clue. Did you see that? That in
Yeah.
the French maid costume. I don't know if you
Yes.
remember this.
Yeah.
I remember it from being 10 or whatever. That was
It
burned into
was
my
burnt. It's
memory.
burned into my psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they actually had to do a fake topless shoot for her so they could put up a fake centerfold. And I'm like, nobody saw that. Francis Ford Coppola or whoever's in charge of that scene talked her into that.
Yes, did
There's
that
no reason why
gratuitously.
they didn't need
Well,
that
it's
prop.
kind of
But
like George Lucas telling what's her name? Oh,
yeah,
they
there's
don't
no
wear bras.
jiggling in the Empire. Yeah.
They don't wear bras in space. Oh, okay, 17-year-old.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Hmm.
creepy. Well, you know what? Marion was supposed to be
Marion
12.
was supposed to be 12. I'm starting to sense a theme here, George.
Honestly, I think George Lucas is like happily married and has never received any complaints that I've ever
I think
heard.
he's been very this entire time. But well, I mean, we're getting about that time, so the impetus is on you to tell us whether people should watch this movie or not.
Well, we have a
Um,
couple of hoops we have to jump through first.
okay.
First of
All right.
all, I did want to point out one more random observation that I had, which is the callback to The Godfather in this one. Did you catch that? When he's at Kurtz's place and they toss Chef's head into his lap, and he reacts exactly the same as the guy in The Godfather. Oh, oh! Like
Yeah,
it
that's
was like
true.
it's hard
Yeah.
not to. It's a scene of finding your friend's head chopped off, and I'm laughing because it's so much like The Godfather.
Yeah, that
I
is a,
think
that
I
is a
think
good
he
point.
I think he struck a slightly sour note in that because of that. But that's one minor ding I would give him. But the other thing we had to talk about is you said your biggest surprise was George Lucas's role in the film. So mine was there's another one about it, and we haven't talked about this part of the film, so I think it's a good thing to bring up. I was really surprised that Marlon Brando looked so much better than he had in The Godfather. Like I was like, oh, he's not in that bad shape. He's older and heavier than he wasn't on the waterfront. But apparently the reality was he showed up so fat and out of shape that that's not him.
Yeah, so he's like 300 pounds. They draped him in like a black muumuu, and they used a body double for like the body scenes, the far off, and the rest of it was just sort of on his face. Yeah, he
Hmm.
was completely out of shape. At this point, he just didn't care. Did you ever see The Island of Dr. Moreau?
Not the modern one with Val Kilmer, right? He
Yes. So that was
yes,
that
okay.
was
Yeah.
that was a modern one of Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando was Dr. Moreau, right?
Okay.
He literally wore like a tent or a parachute for that movie. He was so freaking fat. What's funny about
He was like
so there
Richard Simmons puts you on his TV show fat.
yeah, it was bad. But there are certain people that can pull it off. So there are certain people that from like chest up, they don't look fat. And then chest down, they're a dump truck, and you're like, what? Okay, so like for example, in Star Trek, The New Generation or whatever it was called,
Next
um,
generation.
Next Generation, yeah. Nerd alert. Number two, the second in command,
Riker.
Riker. Okay, that guy. I saw him at LAX one time, and
He's gotten
Regina,
really fat as he's gotten older. Yeah.
Regina and I like were using the restroom, and he was sort of like how they have the men and women's room, and he was like right between the two, standing there, maybe waiting for his wife or whatever. And so Regina and I walk by, and as we're walking, we're looking at each other. We both look up at him because the dude's like 6'3". He's a big guy.
Uh-huh.
And then we look at each other and we're like, oh my God, that's him.
Yeah.
And all I remember is like from the chest up, totally normal. From chest down, he has got the biggest belly I've ever seen on a
Oh,
human. He is
well,
huge. At the time, they were shooting a film. It was like one of those world's greatest mystery films or whatever, like for Fox or something. And he was
okay.
the host of it. Go look at that at those shows. They show him from like the chest up. That's all they show. But Marlon Brando's got it. Like his
Well,
face doesn't
the
look
problem,
fat.
what the problem is for Riker is when you're on the Enterprise in the next generation, they've got that replicator, and you can just make nachos as many times a day as you want.
That's a good point. That's a but that's
Yeah.
terrible. But Brando is like that. Brando doesn't have a fat face. Like he has a normal looking face and like
Yeah. Yeah.
chest up, totally normal. Chest down, because there is one scene where you see him like in his black muumuu. I think it's the scene where he's holding the head. It's the scene where he's holding the head, right? Because he's all dressed in black. He just went and chopped the guy's head off. If you look, you'll see him basically from waist up, and he's like rotund. And you're like, oh my God. That's the only scene that they really have him in because they have to show him his face holding that. Like it's a dramatic scene. After you've seen it for a few times, all you see is how big he is because you know what's coming. So you're not paying attention to that. You just see like, how wide is that guy? He's like,
So you think when he showed up on set and he's grossly overweight and Coppola takes one look at him, do you think Coppola was like, "Hey, I have this idea. We're gonna shoot you with shadows covering most of your body. It's gonna be really artistic. Trust me. There's artistic reasons why I'm
had
gonna
to
do it
have
this way."
known. Yeah, he had to have known. I mean, this is Marlon Brando at the end because he made The Godfather. I think he won an Academy Award. Didn't he win an Academy Award for The Godfather?
I actually don't know. And
Um,
if he did, I think it would have had to have been supporting, right?
it would have been, but this is when he kind of just like checked out of
Right.
Hollywood. I think this is like the last big movie.
It's like
Coppola drew him
Elvis.
back.
Like
Yeah,
Elvis.
yeah, exactly. So I think he's on his island. He bought an island by now. He's got his doing as much living as he possibly can. So he knows, you
He's
know. And
got that replicator making nachos
yeah,
all day.
pretty much. Exactly. Coppola saw him like the last time he saw him was like 3 years ago for Godfather. And it's like, hey, Marlon, come on back. And, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. We'll do that. He shows up. And they had to have been friends because, that
He didn't know he'd hooked the 300-pound Marlin.
right. Well, that was so bad.
I think
That was
that's
a
a great joke.
and they had to have been friends. They worked so long together on The Godfather. It was such a big success. They did the press tours, everything else. I mean, I'm sure when he saw him, he was like, Marlon, what the hell? You know?
I wonder if you could be close enough to him. Do you think Brando was the kind of person that you could tell that to? I don't know, but
I think
yeah,
Coppola could do it.
yeah, maybe. I was really like watching it and I was thinking, well, wait a minute. What other than The Godfather, what is he so famous for? And so I looked back at the filmography and it's like he's killing it in the 50s and even into the early 60s. Obviously on
Yeah.
the waterfront.
All the waterfront.
And The Wild Ones or something
The
like that, I
Wild
think is
Ones,
what he's
yeah, that was a
famous
big
for.
one. Yeah.
And then there's
Glass
also
Menagerie. Oh no,
which one?
Streetcar Named Desire. No, Streetcar Named
Streetcar Named
Desire.
Desire,
Excuse
of
me.
course, yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
And
It's
then Mutiny on the Bounty.
Union in the Bounty. Yeah, there's
There's
blood.
5 or 6
Yeah,
gigantic movies. So you're like, okay,
yeah.
this guy was. I don't know who you could compare him to, but it would be like if I don't know if Tom Cruise had just turned gigantic and overweight in the early '90s and never looked back.
Yeah.
He would still be remembered as Tom
Yeah,
Cruise.
he was a better artist than Tom Cruise. So who's a really I actually
I think that's true.
um
I think that's a bold statement that requires some argument, but I think you're right. I think he is a bigger artist
yeah I
than Tom
think
Cruise. I'm
God
trying to
the
think of
name
somebody comparable today.
no
And
no
they're like
the
Daniel
name
Day-Lewis,
yes that's who I was thinking of Daniel
but if you
Day-Lewis yes
squeezed all of Daniel Day-Lewis's big movies into like an 8-year period, and then the rest was just like a decline, right? Like because
yeah
Daniel Day-Lewis made great movies in the late '80s and then well into the 2000s. It's more like a 20-year period of being the
was
actor.
he I mean because
Yeah, yeah. Because you're talking about There Will Be Blood and Lincoln. Those are way into the 2000s,
like
and you've
My
got
Left Foot and he
My
did
Left Foot is like 88 or 89 or something
Gangs of
like
New
that.
York
Gangs of New
um
York is in the 90s. And then
uh
Last of the Mohicans in the
Last of
early
the
90s.
Mohicans
There's
oh
like a
yeah
20-year
that's
period where
yeah yeah you're
he's a
right you're
big
right
deal for a long
you're
time.
right
But he
Hmm.
only made one movie every 3 or 4 years, and he was super
Yeah
method and super
yes
serious
very
about it.
method yeah
But it
yeah
would be like if you squeezed it in, and also Marlon Brando on top of it had like movie star good looks, right? Like on top of being a serious artist actor, was also like a good enough looking person to just be a movie star and just have fun with it. He didn't. He took it super seriously, and I think went about it in a different way. But so that's why it was a big deal. I kind of had to think about it. I was like, why do I think of Marlon Brando as being such a big deal? But when you look at the record, it speaks for itself. He just had a really long, depressing decline. That's kind of hard to look at.
You mentioned Elvis Presley. One of the reasons Elvis is so huge, is an icon, is because he lived the rock and roll life.
Oh, I thought he was
He
so huge because of all the peanut butter and jelly
that
sandwiches.
that too, which are
Man.
pretty good. No, it was peanut butter and banana. He invented the rock star life. Elvis was the first to have his own jet. He was the first to, do all this stuff.
Mhm.
Marlon Brando owned an island. I mean, the dude was a
Yeah,
baller in the
yeah.
70s and the 60s. The guy was a baller, and he dated every hot chick in the world. But you know what's funny? You mentioned this good-looking dude. Look up Burt Reynolds without a mustache in the 19 like 60s. He is the spitting image of Marlon
Oh,
Brando.
Brando. Well, I could see
Yes.
that. I
Okay.
could see that.
And so Brando, this is really funny. I can't remember what agency Burt Reynolds was with, but because Brando had so much power, he forced Burt Reynolds to have a mustache in the 70s because he looked so much like him. And
Oh,
and and Brando was saying that Burt Reynolds, because Burt Reynolds has said this like in an interview, he said that Burt Reynolds looks so much like him, he's trying to cash in on his looks, and so he forced Burt Reynolds to have his iconic mustache that Reynolds hated. He didn't like having that mustache, but he had
that's
to have it
funny.
contractually with the
Yeah.
with the studio. Isn't
Because
that funny?
yeah, well,
Because
that is really
of
fun.
Marlon Brando.
But that's a really good illustration of what I'm talking about being the difference is that like Marlon Brando looked like Burt Reynolds, but had Daniel Day-Lewis's talent and sensibilities as an actor. So he's like
Right.
the full package in a really, really rare way. I mean, I'm having trouble coming up with anybody like that in history.
So if
Like just a beautiful movie star who is also an Academy Award winning,
yeah.
like perennial Academy Award winning actor. It's kind of hard to think of anybody else. I maybe if I studied on it for a while, I could come up with somebody,
Hmm.
but maybe no, like even somebody like Cary Grant. I mean, he's mostly the personality is the charm. Humphrey Bogart's not particularly like a good looking dude. Like John Wayne, same thing. I mean, he's better looking than the average man, but he's not like Burt Reynolds is like the best looking dude of the 70s, is what Marlon Brando, arguably the best looking guy of the 50s kind of thing. Like
If Brad Pitt could act really good,
Brad Pitt's good. Brad Pitt is a better actor
but
than I
it,
thought.
but
And
but
that's actually a really good, I
if
like that.
Brad Pitt was Daniel Day Lewis's acting though, like
I think you're close. I think that's a
yeah,
really good.
yeah,
I don't think Leonardo DiCaprio's in the same boat acting wise. I think Brad Pitt has the
yeah,
chops to almost be what you're talking. I think that's a really good
yeah.
answer. Question we have to ask ourselves towards the end of an episode of Toasting the Classics is, are we going to toast this classic? You chose this.
It's the question we have to ask you because
Right.
I chose
Exactly.
this, so this is your decision.
Exactly. This is not a plenary committee. This is just what I decide. But do you have any opening arguments?
I had already mentioned legacy. I think
Right.
legacy has always been a big part of these classics. What is the lasting effect of this thing? Like the ripples, because this came out in 79. Are the ripples still being affected, kind of going out into the ether? I would argue that they are. I mean, just that one line, and how much mileage has or traction have they gotten from, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, and all those other classic scenes that we've talked about. Also being, you said the Deer Hunter, you mentioned it. The Deer Hunter isn't really, I mean, it's a Vietnam era
No,
movie.
not as much. Not
Um,
as much. Yeah, I
but
agree.
this is certainly a Vietnam, like one of the first Vietnam War movies.
Half the movie takes
Um,
place in Pittsburgh, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's not
exactly,
really
right.
that.
I think for legacy, I think that's probably the strongest argument. Plus, just the cast. When I say cast, I mean the people that made it up. So that includes the director and the writers and
Sure.
everybody that was involved in this movie. This is sort of like one of those kind of perfect storms of actors and writers and directors and producers and everything kind of coming
Can I
together. Go ahead.
can I get up on my soapbox for 1 second here to make a point
Sure.
that I've been making
Yeah.
for years and nobody agrees with me on?
Okay.
Is that what you just said? When you described the cast, I think the best word for what you're saying is the production, right? Like the entire production, like all
Yes.
those people. To me, the original Best Picture award was handed out to Best Production. That's the first award in the first Academy Awards that was given to the picture that was the best production. And what they meant was everybody came together, everybody doing everything was doing a great job. I think in a lot of people's minds, it changed over the years to being what was the best movie that came out that year. But what they mean is the best production. So I always say this when people are like, Titanic was not the best movie that came out that year. And I'm like, but it was the best production. That was a phenomenal, conglomeration of talent and then people putting together a film. I don't care if you didn't like the movie that much. That was the best production of that year, and therefore it is the best picture.
Works out. So like, they gave it to Return of the King
Yeah.
at the end of the run, and that was deserving because everything it took to make that series,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they gave it to him
Especially if it was
because
like
they,
for all three. It was really for
yeah,
all three.
it
So
really
that's
was, and so like
yeah.
in that case it works out. But that stupid Life Aquatic or no, no, not that. Life Aquatic was a different movie. That was a Bill Murray
No,
movie.
no, I know what you're
What's
talking
a
about. Shape of
what the hell
Water.
is Shape of
Shape of Water.
Water? Like who? What? Who
You know,
cares?
you know, I did that as a
That's a
bullpen.
dumb movie,
You know, I did that
huh?
as a bullpen episode on the show.
Oh,
Yeah, I
terrible.
don't think I ended up, I can't remember what we came down to on that one. It was a good movie. It was
Yeah.
not a bad movie, but it was a weird Best Picture pick. Really
But
weird
like,
Best.
but like, okay, like Parasite. You and I did Parasite,
Yeah.
and that got best foreign movie, I believe, or
No, that
something
was
like
Best
that.
Picture. That was the
Oh, was that
first
best
foreign film to
picture?
ever win Best Picture. Yeah.
Okay.
And I
And
thought it was a great movie. I don't know
but
if it was Best Picture.
I don't know if it's
I
best
really,
picture material. Yeah.
Nah, I don't know if it really combined all the elements that you need, but I
Yeah.
think people were saying it was the best movie of the year, which I think that it's
Yes.
more arguable because it was a really good movie.
Maybe we asked this. Didn't Little Tiger Hidden Dragon or whatever it's called?
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I
Didn't that one
think that was
get
an
best?
American production, though. I think that has a
Was
lot of
it?
Chinese actors, but I think that's an American. I think
But it's
Ang
in
Lee came to the
but
States.
it's in Chinese though.
Yeah, but I think Ang Lee made the movie with an American production company, if I remember right.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
And that's the kind of movie. Did that win Best Picture? Because if it did,
I think
that
so.
deserves
Let's
it.
see.
It's a gigantic, beautiful film that does everything right across the board. You got all this great sound and effects and looks and actors and casting and scenes and setting and everything was just done really well. But and to me, that's what Best Picture means. So in other words, when we talked about Annie Hall, and I was as a kid, I always hated Annie Hall because it beat out Star Wars for Best Picture. And then I watched
Right.
it as I got older and I was like, no, that's a great movie. But then I'm looking back on it, but was it Best Picture? I don't know. Because it's really not
Right.
that big of a production. It's kind of a small little movie, right? If you think about it, although it's a very important film. That's just a little hobby horse of mine. I apologize for cutting off what you were saying. So you were giving opening arguments for the decision on whether or not.
What I was saying, which was that as a production, like this is sort of this culmination of all the best talent at the time. These are all the reasons it's deserving, I guess. So let's say, I think, like I said, the production and the quality of it, the people that were involved in it, between the, those who were acting, those who were writing, everything else was okay. Go ahead.
1979 Best Picture is listed as being The Deer Hunter, but I can never remember if that means that it
Oh
was
no,
a
no,
film that came out.
this would have to be 1980 then.
This should have been the 1980. Oh, it was Ordinary
Yes,
People, which I have never seen.
which is
That's got a whole bunch of incredible people in it. I wouldn't want to say, without having seen it, I wouldn't want to say that wasn't a great movie. So I'm actually going to reserve judgment. And you know what I'm going to do?
hmm.
I was thinking about choosing Heart of Darkness for my free choice. We're going to watch Ordinary People for the free choice, the 1980 Best Picture that beat out Apocalypse Now.
As a follow up then.
As a follow-up, as a sort of
Okay.
follow-up, as a sort of spiritual follow-up. We're
Okay.
gonna find out whether the 1980 American drama film directed by it's another directed by Robert Redford, by the way.
Oh,
Who
okay. Wait,
we've
another that must have been one of his first then. So
anyway. So
what say you?
I did not enjoy this film at all when I
Okay.
watched it when I was in high school.
Okay.
It just was too much for me. The surreal element, not surreal. I'm saying I would have said surreal then. I wouldn't describe it that way now, but just the artistic elements of it and some things like the fade-ins and things like that. There was some film class stuff going on in the film that put me off. And now
Mhm.
at this point, that doesn't bother me as much. I thought there were some great performances in this. I really enjoyed where the movie came from. If you have some perspective on like how it started the Vietnam film,
Yeah.
and I think it's probably in the argument, in the conversation, the argument for best war movie of all time. Now, I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to say
I
off
see
the
that.
top of my head because I haven't compared some of the stuff that goes back, to like the dawn of the film age, obviously.
Yeah.
But of the movies of our lifetime for war movies, this one's one of the best. I'm not a huge Saving Private Ryan guy. I like that
Yeah.
movie,
Uh-huh.
but that one's probably in that conversation as well, and that would be a really interesting conversation to have. But this is such a huge film. It was a successful film, surprisingly. That was actually on my list of things for biggest surprises. This actually made money and was a commercially successful movie. Because I think a movie in order to make money has to be enjoyable for the stupids. And a stupid person could enjoy this as a war movie, just be like, "Yay, Ride of the Valkyries," right? Like if you're a real
Right.
idiot, you could go in
Yes.
there and just rah rah, and that's fine. I have those same emotions, but I take the movie as that scene and the blowing up the bridge when the guys have got trying to get across the bridge with the 50 cal and they torch it with a
Yes.
rocket. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That's a good visceral action movie, war movie, kablooey. That was fun to watch the VC blow up. Run, Charlie, run, right? But
Yeah.
I'm voting for it. I think this one's a classic. I think this one's
All
right up
right.
there in the with these three great filmmakers that we like so much,
Mhm.
Lucas, Coppola, and Spielberg. I think this
Yeah.
is one of the top 10 of that group and top 10 maybe of the decade. So this is a good one.
Perfect. Well, thank you very
I
much.
don't think it's as good as The Godfather,
Yeah, I agree.
but I don't like Godfather 2, and I think I might enjoy this one equally or maybe even a little bit more than
Well,
Godfather
that's
2.
the one that got Best Picture, Godfather 2.
I think they both
Yeah.
won Best Picture
Did
actually.
they? Yeah, they
If
might have.
I'm not remembering incorrectly, I think both. But most smart film people consider The Godfather 2 to be like the greatest film of all time.
Yeah,
I'm a
right.
Godfather 1 guy every time. I
Yeah,
don't enjoy all that Cuba crap in Godfather 2. It's just
right.
boring. But yeah, I'm voting for it. I'm toasting it. I'm guessing you couldn't hear that clinking bottle.
I could not.
Yeah.
That's okay.
All right.
We can add that in.
So for Dave McArthur, signing out.
This is Dr. Professor Clint Lanier. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for episode 110 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking when we discuss the 1980 Best Picture winner, Ordinary People. If you'd like to get in touch, email us at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, or let us know what you think is the best war movie of all time. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on X at @activenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.